when they do, we can engage in lots of activities, potential, and one of those would be the self-aggrandizement, that inflation of the self, the pufferfish sort of thing. So in the face of feeling anything, feeling anxiety, slight discomfort, we can suddenly pufferfish it, and we can suddenly make ourselves the biggest thing in the room. Coate would say that that's defensive. He would also say that it's on a continuum. All of us have to maintain a narcissistic equilibrium. We all have to.
Okay.
But there are healthier and less healthier ways to do so. And I think what her article is saying is she thinks, and this is her opinion, that Trump is someone who has displayed over and over again an unhealthy way to maintain that equilibrium, and the result, he may not be someone you want with the most powerful job in the world.
So someone who is out of equilibrium, much more so balanced toward the self than others. In other words, everything has to be centered around. It's almost a self-centeredness. Everything that is out in the world, even other people, has to do with themselves.
Well, part of at the healthiest continuum, we may have a moment we slip when we get in that disequilibrium, where we can see the world. We can only see ourselves and the rest of the world around us, the people around us, as part objects. But we can quickly, or relatively quickly, move back to a place of balance where we can see ourselves and other people as other selves, as whole objects. So, we might be able to apologize. And it's very difficult to say whether this is actually political theater or not. But one of the things the Democrats did a really good job of was sort of making use of the Muslim American father who'd lost his son in Iraq.
Very controversial issue, and controversial because of Trump's response to that.
And again, it's hard to say how much of this is political theater and how much is being played up and distorted, but Trump's response, which again, if he was under attack, the guy was waving the Constitution and said, "You've lost nothing." So we can see at that moment, Trump sustained a narcissistic injury that anybody would experience. I think that's a universal occurrence. If you were attacked in that way, what we want to think about is how he responded. And I think what the Congresswoman says, that Trump's response shows an inability to see the other, that he continued to maintain the role to see the father and his wife as part objects. If he had said something akin to, your son gave the ultimate sacrifice for his country. I hope that you can be proud of him, and I certainly am. And I disagree with the things that he said, and I really think that maybe he and I should sit down and talk. And if we did, I think he might see that I am much closer to the way to what he believes, or whatever. He could say something like that.
Right, sure.
But if you'll notice, that sort of response requires the capacity to be able to see the other. And you could say, and I think that's part of what she's trying to say here, is that his response was one of, he continued to be focused on his own injuries and not so much on the person in front of him. Right.
You talked about a wound, that his ego, his sort of definition of himself was accosted. It was he saw it as some attack on himself, which really kind of leads to the cutoff from others. And I would say empathy, the idea of sort of understanding what's going on with another person and how it affects, and have that moment of empathy as opposed to feeling attacked and then having to attack back.
I think, and Coate's contribution to our field is that he raised empathy to the nth degree. That empathy is the thing that cures, and empathy is the thing that a narcissist needs. So that in Coate's treatment of narcissist, he would, again, whether it's Trump or whoever we might deem this as narcissist. Not we're saying Trump's a narcissist. But keep making that disclaimer. APA, I didn't call him a narcissist.
That's it, right.
But that if someone who is a narcissist comes into treatment, and I'm sort of combing through some of the things that have occurred with patients over the last few weeks, and I have a couple of patients who pretty squarely move in this narcissistic realm. And I think of a patient who he has a roommate, and his roommate didn't clean up the dishes. Right. And so he came in and he spent the first 15 or 20 minutes talking about how the roommate was horrible, the roommate was a loser, the roommate was overweight, The roommate was all these sorts of things, and it was this what Coet calls narcissistic rage.
Okay.
So he experienced the lack of dishes, and anybody in that situation would be annoyed, maybe even
Right.
really upset. But what made this narcissistic is it spurred narcissistic rage, and then there was this poisonous attack in which the roommate became a part object. There was splitting. The roommate became this horrible person. If this person was organized a little differently, they may have experienced that frustration as anger but they still might hold and maintain some image of the other where they weren't this complete and utter, and they weren't, it didn't become rage.
Right.
And what I think she says, and there's even some couple of articles that we have here too, where, she would say that Trump has a tendency to respond to every attack, be it from a Twitter feed, from wherever the case may be, with a certain level of rage, calling his opponents dumb and crooked and lying and all that sort of stuff, and that might reflect this narcissistic rage that comes from any slight wounding.
Right, any small, that most of us would probably take that hit, but it wouldn't invoke
cause
that
us
type,
to go whoop,
right,
and then
that
suddenly
type of
have
rage.
to reassert ourselves in some ways that are clearly narcissistic in nature.
Well, it's interesting in a political climate too, because now we're at the national election cycle past the primaries, and the notion is that this is on a much bigger stage. There's also something about seeking attention that is in this narcissistic symptom list, if you will. But also at the same time, you have to be seeking attention. You want people's attention. So the system that they're in is almost as if it's encouraging the narcissism.
There was an article, and I can't remember where, this was years ago, where they were talking about, and they were using examples of the continuum of narcissism. And they were using Bill Clinton as an example of a more healthy form of narcissism.
Okay.
But what you said is, to want to get up in front of people, or to have the eyes of, or lots of people to be thinking of you, that is a form of narcissism. That is, But again, we have to put that in a continuum, and we have to be able to say that there is Freud called it primary narcissism, and Freud's vision is that, and he had that libido theory. So there was this notion that we had all this energy that we're directing toward ourselves, and we have to find a way to be able to turn it out into the world. And he said that's part of what our growth and the right sort of developmental things occur that move us in that direction.
Right.
Coates is a bit more in the sense that we are other-driven, and we want the investment of others. And so there is a healthy amount of narcissism that would push anybody into public office. You have to tolerate, or at least crave and pursue, that sort of investment and interest. And that someone like Clinton maybe, again, the article was talking about he might be a different form of narcissism. Again, I didn't say that, it was the article, wasn't me. Right. And that you could almost, in a way, compare and contrast maybe Trump and Clinton in terms of how they might handle this investment and this need for connection, and that might be interesting.
Well, it's really interesting that so many people have kind of jumped on the Donald Trump bandwagon, or supporters, strong supporters, and even when some of this very controversial kind of presentation is made, that they don't doubt that. It's almost like it reinforces something with them. In other words, he said at one point, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I would not lose any voters.
Yeah.
I mean, who makes that statement?
Yeah,
but it's very interesting. We could probably go, we could do a whole show on the list of things, just the list that he said.
We'll look at any charismatic leader, and history shows that there are a number of people who appear to be malignant narcissists who come into power. They become leaders of cults. They become leaders of nations. I mean, there is something both alluring. There is something the narcissist, and again, there are different types of narcissism, but there are the the type of narcissist who has the capacity to draw you in. You can feel a warm glow in their presence. They stoke the fires in you as their own fires get stoked. And again and again through history, that has proven bad things have happened.
Yes, and
It's
well,
not,
the issue that a supporter is sort of reinforced for some of their own narcissism, if you will, in that way. But I heard someone say that these are people who, regardless of what happens or what is said, will still be in that camp. In other words, they just sort of hunker down and stay in that even more so, even strongly, a more strong support for the person in this, and that's a little strange. It's
yeah, there's some
hard to
interesting
explain
research on that. I was reading some of that this morning. And it's called. Oh wait, there's a term for it. And there's some interesting research on that. That having a piece of knowledge can cause you to be ignorant of other forms of knowledge, and that knowing and there's some interesting research, which, and again, not to be too political, but on the difference between conservative and liberal personalities and even brain functioning. And one of the things that pop up again and again, and there's also a notion of fascism and this measure of fascism, and how in some ways Trump's rhetoric speaks from a fascist perspective. You know, there's a way in which that is us and them.
Right.
There's a way in which that it, you know,
splitting
that,
in that way.
in fact, you can go back and you can look at some of whether it's and again, shouldn't. How long do you go into a conversation before you drop the Hitler bomb? But we're far enough in this. I think I can do this.
Well, it's often in politics you see that
Yeah,
coming out. They throw
but,
that out very
you
easily.
know, Hitler ran on a platform of making Germany great again. That's what the idea of a Third Reich was.
Wow. Okay, there you go.
That really was.
That's not a ball cap
Stalin,
I want, by the way.
Was, you know, very much about this this creating a utopia that we will make this place that we will return to, and so there are these. So all that sort of runs through this sort of fascist rhetoric. But what seems to be interesting is if you look at some of the research on politics and through this liberal and conservative divide, there are two or three things that stand out. One of those is disgust responses. They hooked individuals up to functional MRIs and showed them pictures of a muffin with maggots on it, and based on the response that they saw in the functional MRI, they were up to, it was like an 83% chance of determining what their politics were.
Wow.
They could literally say that they could make that call with that level of certainty. And the other was this notion of openness to experience. So there's disgust and these, there are a couple of others too, but I think that was the most interesting. And if you'll notice in Trump's rhetoric, there are Mexicans, there are rapists pouring across the border.
Right.
That's a narrative that he pulls from. Mm-hmm. And he makes this broad Muslims. Maybe we need to stop Muslims from coming into this country. He talks about, at one point, attacking the families of ISIS people, of bringing back waterboarding or worse.
Right.
And both of these reflect a...
And I might add, some of the recent ones had to do with why can't we use nuclear weapons? Mm-hmm. So which even pull out the weapons. Yeah, that's a very interesting point.
Yeah, that's...
I didn't mean to take you off on there, but
having grown up in a time when the nuclear threat loomed large, that really doesn't. That's not.
But also, go ahead.
But these are all fear responses. These are all they're the very active amygdala that they activate that part of the brain, and there's something about when you say that his base. There's nothing he could do that they wouldn't vote against him, and it may have something to do with this fear, this being grounded in needing to act quickly and decisively, and maybe even violently in the face of what looks like an overwhelming and consuming threat.
Right. I mean, the notion of playing to the fear is a big strategy. It's a huge strategy now in politics across the board. Probably more for one party than the other, but nevertheless, it's there and it plays to that very deep sort of. And at the same time, they're talking about change, and I think we can all kind of go along with the idea of change. But when you add that to